So muscles don't just move on their own, specifically skeletal muscles that are voluntary. You have to connect them to your brain. So muscles are connected to our brain or spinal cord through nerves. A motor unit is one nerve, so one neuron, and all of the muscle cells that it innervates. Remember, muscle fiber is the same thing as muscle cells. So this allows all of these muscle cells to contract together in unison as one. Most motor units average about 300 muscle fibers for each neuron. This is different for different regions of your body. So a small motor unit is going to be one nerve and fewer muscle cells. So these are going to be areas of where we need fine control. So these can be as small as 3 to 5 fibers. Think about your fingers that are very dexterous, as well as like your micro expressions in your face, so your lips, your tongue. Larger motor units are going to typically be used for strength and power rather than fine motor control. So anything from about 500 to 1,000 fibers per neuron could be considered large. So think about the muscles in your back or quads or your gluteus. You're not using your gluteus to do something as complex as writing notes. You use them to do squats and lunges, which require more strength rather than specific dexterity. We also have large motor units, so you can see in this motor unit that within the different fascicles, so right here's the whole muscle, and here's a fascicle, here's a fascicle. The purple ones are corresponding to this purple nerve, and the green ones correspond to this green nerve. So there are muscle fibers in every fascicle for each of those nerves. So I can fire just the green nerve and still contract the whole muscle. Or I can fire the green and the purple nerve and contract more of the muscle. But it kind of does the same thing, the muscle still shortens. But this allows me to contract fewer muscle fibers at one time. So this means the muscle can potentially work longer on easier tasks. So if I'm like running a long distance, each firing of the muscle isn't going to fire the entire muscle. It'll fire some of it, some motor neurons, so motor units. And eventually, when those specific muscles fatigue, it can fire different cells. And so the entire muscle can last longer because it's not firing every single muscle fiber, every single motor unit, every single time. So where the neuron meets the muscle is called the neuromuscular junction. So junction is where they come together. So here we can see 3 of them. There's one here, there's one here, and there's one here. So this is the end of this nerve, and it's going to come to these 3 spots. So if we zoom in here, this is the end of a single nerve, and we've got a teeny tiny gap here that goes all the way across, and that's called the synaptic cleft, or the synapse. And that's this space between the nerve here and the muscle here. So when the nerve reaches the end, it kind of spreads out. It wides out into this axon terminal. So this section of the nerve is called the axon. Terminal means end, so this is just the end of the nerve. And it kind of flattens out here like it got squished a little bit. Inside of this axon terminal, it has synaptic vesicles. And so vesicles, remember, are just little pockets of membrane that have proteins in them. And inside of all of these little vesicles is a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which we abbreviate with capital A, capital C, lowercase h for stimulating muscle contractions. The acetylcholine will then get released into this synaptic cleft, and then it'll get taken up by these little receptors on the muscle cell membrane, the sarcolemma. So these are acetylcholine receptors, that should be capital C, and they're going to receive the signal. And when they receive the signal, it's going to signal to the muscle, hey, it's time to be excited. We're going to go ahead and start the process of contracting. All right, so how do we get excited? So the first thing we need to understand about being excited is that muscles have a resting membrane potential. So resting means I'm not excited yet. It's neat. So at resting, this means that I have not done anything yet. So here you can see my cell membrane. So this is my sarcolemma of my muscle. ICF means intracellular, so this is the inside. ECF means extracellular, so this is the outside. And then here in green, you've got the plasma membrane. So what's happening right here is this is simulating something called a voltmeter, and this voltmeter is going to measure the difference between the inside and the outside as far as the electrical voltage. The resting membrane potential of a cell is typically negative 70 millivolts, and this is a number that is going to come up again and again when we talk about muscle action potentials and neuron action potentials, so it's a number you might as well know. Resting membrane potential is equal to negative 70 millivolts. So if you look at the cell membrane, the inside of the cell, we have mostly little red balls. And these little red balls represent potassium ions, which have a positive charge of +1. On the outside of the cell are mostly blue. And these blue are going to represent sodium ions, which also have a charge of +1. The resting membrane potential is maintained by the sodium-potassium pump. So this is an active transport pump. This is our example of all active transport that we like to use, sodium-potassium pump. Sodium-potassium pump is going to move 3 sodiums out for every 2 potassium in. So even though these are both positively charged, the outside tends to be more positive because it gets 3 pluses, and the inside tends to be more negative because it only gets 2 positive charged ions every time this thing pumps. So we have a difference between these of negative 70 millivolts is the difference between the charge on the outside and the charge on the inside when the cell is resting. And the reason it can stay this way is because this sodium-potassium pump, it uses ATP to pump sodiums out, back up their concentration gradient, and potassium in, up its concentration gradient. And this is going to become important because when an action potential comes along, these sodiums and the potassiums are going to change locations and cause excitation. So an action potential is the stimulus that's going to move along the neuron, and then when it gets to here, it's going to cause the muscle to have an action potential, and that's going to excite that cell. So take a moment and reflect on what is a motor unit.